Thanks for the warm welcome, Chrissy. And it's fantastic to be here. This is my first TechKnow, so really delighted to share the Argenica story. We're slightly different company from what you've heard before. We have no revenue, but I think that's a good thing because the potential for revenue is absolutely huge in this market. So I'll just give you a bit of a snapshot of Argenica. We listed 2 years ago, so June 2021. We are a clinical stage drug development company now, so we are developing novel drugs that are able to protect brain cells following brain injury. So the first indication or application of the drug that we're going after is in ischemic stroke. So this is where we've got the majority of our preclinical data. So we're pushing into a phase 2 trial in that indication. But we are really interested in other neurological conditions, which I'll touch on a little bit later. They are still in preclinical development, but again, huge opportunities. So as I said, we're really going after large markets with huge unmet medical needs. So there are currently no drugs on the market that are able to protect brain cells when you have a stroke, when you have a traumatic brain injury, or even universal drugs that are able to protect against neurological conditions such as, or neurodegenerative conditions such as Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disease. So the way that our drug works is really unique in that it's working on multiple different pathways of what happens when a brain cell dies. And this is really important in getting these drugs to market and working in a more comprehensive way. And because we're going into a phase 2 trial, so we're about to test our drug in humans that have had a stroke, we're starting to get a huge amount of interest from global pharma companies. So drugs is where pharma makes all their money. These are huge markets. They're looking for blockbuster drugs. So diagnostics devices are good, but it's really the drug market that is that really big sort of opportunity for these pharma companies. So as I said, we listed in June 21. We've been really busy. So we were a preclinical company, meaning we hadn't actually tested our drug in humans at that stage. So we've managed to, in that 2 years, progress all the preclinical work we needed to do to get our drug into humans. We've undertaken a phase 1 trial in healthy human volunteers where we've shown that the drug is safe, it's well tolerated, and we've built an exceptional team really to help us progress through these clinical trials. And in doing that, we've managed to generate some pretty significant value for shareholders. So 90% increase from our listing share price in 2021. So just some key company metrics. So we recently did a $4 million raise. We've got about 9.3 mil cash in the bank and another couple of mil coming through from our R&D tax rebate. So really well funded to progress our phase 2 trial. So in terms of the strategy of the company, we do really sort of reserve the cash that we raise through the market for that phase 2 stroke indication. And then we've managed to attract over $4 million in non-dilutive funding, and that's to progress those other preclinical indications. So they're all funded by grants. We're sitting around a 36 mil market cap at the moment, so pretty cheap. If you want to look at a comparator, you can look at Neuron, which is a similar peptide drug, neurological indications. They are now worth $1.2 billion. So I'll just talk about our lead drug candidate. It's known as ARG-007. Key things to, I guess, to sort of really take away here is, as I said before, the drug works on multiple mechanisms of action. A lot of the drugs going through the clinic at the moment are working only on a single pathway in that brain cell death, and they're not having fantastic efficacy. So they're sort of safe. They're kind of showing a little bit of efficacy in terms of functional outcomes, but they really are limited to just that one target. What we know about neurological conditions is that they're multifaceted. So they're really complex. There's obviously often a lot of downstream cascade signalling that happens when the brain cells start to die. And any drug really does need to work on a combination of these pathways. We own all the patents in the company, so the drug has had 10 years of preclinical development, out of the Perrin Neuroscience Research Institute and the University of Western Australia in Perth. So we have done a lot of that legwork already to get it into the clinic. And by having all that preclinical efficacy data, it really de-risks the asset. And that data is published in peer-reviewed journals, and we have over 25 peer-reviewed publications, which is pretty phenomenal for an early-stage biotech company. And one of the biggest de-risking milestones is showing that the drug is safe in humans, which we've recently done. So I'll just explain how exactly the drug works. So if you were to have a stroke, and I hope none of you do, but statistics-wise, a couple of you in this room will, you will either have an ischemic stroke, which is caused by a blood clot in the blood vessel in the brain, or a hemorrhagic stroke. They both present the exact same way when the paramedic arrives and the symptoms that you're presenting. So what we're talking about here is ischemic stroke. This makes up around 85% of all strokes. So when you have a clot in the blood vessel in your brain, you're stopping that blood flow to that part of the brain. The brain needs blood flow because blood delivers oxygen, and brain cells can't last very long at all without oxygen. So they start to die. So you get an immediate sort of area of brain cell death. What then happens, because every brain cell talks to each other, is you start getting this proliferation or cascading out of cell death. And there's a saying in stroke that time is brain. So time is of the essence. And for ischemic stroke, the treatment really is to get to the hospital as soon as possible to remove that clot. So what this drug does, what we've shown in that extensive amount of preclinical work, is that we're hibernating those brain cells. So we're protecting them from that horrible sort of lack of oxygen or all the nasty things that happen in the brain when you get that lack of oxygen. And they hibernate for about 12 hours, which is the perfect amount of time to get to the hospital and get the treatment that you need. So you're not getting that cascading out of cell death. So to talk about that in a clinical setting, so the problem with stroke is that paramedics don't know if you've had an ischemic stroke or a hemorrhagic stroke, and the treatment is quite different. So for an ischemic stroke, as I said, you need to remove the clot. Clinicians do that either by delivering a drug which can dissolve the clot, but if you give that to a hemorrhagic stroke patient, they'll bleed out and they'll die. So you need to diagnose the type of stroke and then work out the treatment program. But that takes quite a lot of time. So in all that time, you're getting that cascading out of brain cell death. So really what we're trying to do is stop that, hibernate the neurons, and buy that patient time to get to the hospital and get the treatment that they need. So this is probably the most, sort of comprehensive study that we've done in a non-human primate model, where we've shown that our drug is able to reduce that total amount of brain cell death by 66%, 24 hours post-stroke. When blood flow is restored, you get a secondary injury. So if you have a thrombectomy procedure where you're mechanically removing the clot, patients often get this secondary injury, and 50% of them actually do worse off, even though you've removed the clot. What this is showing at 28 days post-stroke, we're actually protecting also against that secondary wave of injury. So really encouraging results to date. We've got that 70% reduction in total amount of brain cell death. We also know that our drug doesn't exacerbate bleeding in a hemorrhagic stroke model, so we know that it's safe to deliver in the field. We've done our phase 1, so we know there's no adverse events and it's safe to deliver. But we also know that it can be given with that clot-dissolving drug. So any drug development program needs to work with current standard of care. You need to show that your drug doesn't have any adverse interactions with whatever drugs are currently administered to patients. So we've got data, published data, to show that we can administer our drug with the clot-dissolving drug. So all this presents as ARG-007 being a really ideal stroke therapeutic. We have very, very little competition in this space. A lot of drugs have gone before us with very little preclinical efficacy data, only working on single mechanisms of action that have failed. We're only one of a handful of companies globally that has been able to progress a neuroprotectant drug into phase 2 clinical trials. And for all the reasons I've listed, we think we've got probably the best shot of anyone to actually get this drug to market. And so what is the market? So the current stroke treatment market globally is $183 billion. Looking at ischemic stroke and actually delivering this, so we've done a lot of work around pricing of our drug, it would be about $10,000. It's a single dose that's administered, a single IV infusion. So you can see with about 6,000 people presenting with an ischemic stroke in US hospitals, we're talking about a huge global market that is currently untapped. So currently no one in this market. So what have we achieved today? We're really proud of what we've done. We've worked really hard over the last 2 years to get this drug into a phase 2 clinical trial. We've surrounded ourselves with amazing experts that are able to deliver this phase 2 trial. They've done it before. They've got fantastic clinical expertise. And so we've just recently submitted our ethics to seek approval to undertake that phase 2 trial. So if I just talk about the phase 2 trial and what this means, this is absolutely pivotal for our company. So when we get this data out for the phase 2, this is when we'll start having the licensing and acquisition type of agreements with pharmaceutical companies. So the trial will be conducted solely in Australia in up to 10 hospitals. So we've got PA Hospital in Brisbane, so if you were to have a stroke and present to that hospital over the next 2 years, there's a high chance that you will receive this drug on the clinical trial. It is a blinded trial, so we're taking a single dose of ARG-007 and a placebo control. It's randomised, so we won't know who is receiving what drug, and we'll recruit around 92 patients into that trial. The patient has to be receiving a thrombectomy, so this is a mechanical removal of the clot, and the reason that we do this is because these are the most severe types of stroke, but we're also looking for an efficacy signal for that, what's known as that reperfusion injury, so that second injury you get to the brain when you remove the clot because of the sheer force of blood flow going back into the brain. It is a safety study first and foremost, so we want to prove that the drug is safe to deliver to patients that have had an ischemic stroke, but we will be looking at preliminary efficacy data, so how good is our drug at essentially reducing that total amount of brain cell death, and also looking at functional outcomes of these patients. So we anticipate that we will be dosing first patients in Q1 next calendar year. And as I said, we have an absolutely incredible team running this trial. These people have run global clinical trials, so our lead principal investigator, Graham Hankey, is running a huge trial for Bristol Myers Squibb and Janssen at the moment. So delighted to have these people on board that have the skills we need for a successful trial. So I just want to quickly touch on the additional indications that we're going after. So as I said before, neurological conditions are multifaceted, and what we've realised is that this drug is working in multiple different ways. So it's hibernating the neurons when you're getting what's known as exocytotoxicity, or that reduction in blood flow to the brain. So this is relevant in hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy. This is a rare paediatric disease caused by the cord around the neck in infants, preeclampsia in the mother, and it results in horrendous functional outcomes for these babies, often presenting as cerebral palsy, learning difficulties. There's no drugs that are able to protect brain cells. This is an orphan indication, and so we're really excited about the data that we have in HIE. Being an orphan designation, you do get accelerated approval, regulatory approval as well, so we will be going down that pathway. But what the drug also does is it reduces the aggregation of protein. So we put out an announcement this morning showing that our drug reduces alpha-synuclein. This is one of the biggest aggregates of proteins that you see in Parkinson's disease, but also implicated in Alzheimer's disease. So we've got data now to show the drug reduces aggregation of beta-amyloid protein, alpha-synuclein protein, and now we're looking at tau as well. Tau's also implicated in TBI, so we recently published some really exciting data in traumatic brain injury. We've got a federal government grant to progress that into concussion, which is also obviously very topical. And Chrissy's standing up, and I've got 15 seconds, so I will conclude. Look, so we're really excited. The next couple of years is going to be absolutely huge for the company. We think we're on to an absolute winner with this drug. It's come out of a decade of research, out of a really, really prestigious research institute in Perth. We're working with world-leading team. We've de-risked the drug. We know it's safe to deliver to humans. So now we just need to see a bit of efficacy to be able to progress it all the way to the clinic. So thank you.